This is the Simpit Driving School. I'm your instructor, Sean Cole, and today's lesson is all about weight transfer. Weight transfer is a very important aspect of racing, and it's basically your car's way of reacting to G-forces or to your request of it moving weight from a position that it was currently in during acceleration, during braking, during turning of the wheel. All of those create forces and your car has to react to it. Now, as a driver, we need to know what it's doing so that we can deal with it. And as a crew chief, we need to understand what's going on with the car so that we can make changes to the car to affect that weight transfer and the handling of the car. In our second lesson, we covered acceleration and braking, and we just began to touch the surface of weight transfer. Under acceleration, you felt the force of the vehicle moving backward, the car wanting to raise the nose and squat the rear, and that was weight transfer from the front going to the back under acceleration. Under braking, we saw the exact opposite. We jumped on the brakes, we saw all of the momentum and the weight of the vehicle transferring forward, and it wanted to dip the nose and raise the rear end of the car to accommodate for that new change in weight transfer. Now in cornering, we're going to be doing the same thing, but now we're adding left and right loads onto the car. Now, if we go to a skid pad or a good testing ground where we could just drive around in circles, you get a real sensation of what the car is doing when I'm talking about weight transfer during corner. So let's say we're just going around in circles, and you're going to see, if we're turning to the left, you're going to see that all of the body weight, just like acceleration and braking, we turn left and the body weight needs to roll outward to the right. So you got my little RC here, and you can just see, if I turn to the left a little bit, it would throw the weight and you would see the suspension start to drop on the right and start to lift on the left. And that is its compensation for weight transfer to the outside of the corner. The weight of the vehicle is thrown to the outside edge of the car. As the suspension adjusts, this transfer of weight actually puts more weight on the vehicle's outside tires than when it was going in a straight line. The opposite is true of the inside wheels as the weight is transferred off of them to the outside. This means that the outer tires are doing more work than the inside tires, just like when the load or the weight of the vehicle had moved forward under maximum braking, putting more weight on the front wheels than the rear. Now under acceleration or braking or just turning, it's pretty simple. You're either diving onto the nose, squatting back onto the rear, or throwing the weight left or right. But when we start to put it all together, it gets a little bit more complicated. But what I want you to always be sensitive to when it comes to weight transfer is where the weight is going means that's the tire that is taking on the entire load. Now, I'm going to simplify things a little bit. Let's just say that cars are 50-50 balance, meaning that a car sits on the ground with equal weight on the front and rear, left and right tires, and even though not all cars have that balance, let's just use that as our guideline. Things like putting the engine in the front would give it more weight in the front. In the back, obviously, would put more weight in the rear. Mid-engine cars balance that weight. So there are a lot of other variables. And the geometry of the car, you could have a 60-40. But for this conversation, let's just say that we have a 50-50 balance and this car sits just like this. Now, of course, to recap, when I brake, it puts all the weight, not all the weight, it transfers that weight to the front. 60-40, 70-30, 80-20. It will keep putting weight when we're under braking. When we turn, we will keep putting forces to the outside. Same thing. It'll go from 50-50 to 60-40 to 70-30, 80-20, putting weight to the outside tires when we're turning this direction. Now, that has a limitation. Both of them have a limitation when you exceed total grip. But when we go into a corner, we start off on the brakes. We usually load up the front, putting a little bit of weight here. But the minute you start to turn, let's say we're doing a right-hand turn, the minute I start to turn, the car is going to transfer weight to the outside. Well, that means that instead of it being on the front, it's now going to start to unload this tire, transfer weight to the outside, starting with most of the weight still on the front because we are still under braking. Let me take the car body off, do the same thing, see if it can make any sense. We'll also try to do a slow-mo of in-game to show you exactly what I'm talking about. I want you to really understand what's happening here because it'll come back throughout all of our lessons over and over. The car is going down the straightaway. we hit the brakes, and you can see it puts more weight. The front dips, more weight goes to the front tires. We start to turn, it starts to roll out. Well, the weight was already down here, and now it's going to roll out starting this direction. And then as we get towards apex and we're not under braking, the car will start to center its weight back to that middle front to background, and it'll start to equally distribute the weight between the two outside tires. And then when we switch to power on, just like under our acceleration and braking, it's going to start to transfer that weight to the rear, still on the outside tires, and put most of the weight back to the rear tire on its own. So, why do I want you to understand this? We can affect what the car is doing as a crew chief. We can slow down that weight transfer. As a driver, we can be less erratic on the controls, and that might decrease the speed at which certain transfers of energy are happening. And if it happens too fast, you can just go right past what the tires can handle on the track. Now let's break it down one more time in super slow-mo, and I'm going to use game footage this time so you can really see what's going on. If you start off with a typical corner, you're going down the straightaway, you're going to get onto the brakes, and the weight is going to start to transfer to the front wheels. We'll usually start to turn in while there's still more load on the front wheels from braking. If we start to add wheel input for corner entry, the weight will transfer to the outside, the left side of the car. And at that moment, the front left tire is doing more work than any other tire on the car. Again, the opposite is true for the inside rear tire. As the car loses speed and we are no longer braking, but just coasting and turning, that weight will start to move back towards the rear end of the car as it settles. This will then balance the load more between the front and back tires, with most of the load still being towards the outside left tires. When we begin to accelerate once again, the weight moves towards the rear, mostly on the outside tire. And opposite of entering the corner, it is now the front right tire that is doing hardly any work at all and could almost be floating in the air. All of these forces can help us at times and they can hurt us at others, but it really comes down to knowing what's going on so that if we are going to make a change as a driver or a crew chief, that we know we're focusing on the right moment and the right part of the car to fix that particular problem. Now, when we move forward in later lessons, it's always going to come back to weight transfer. When you're handling certain corner types, when you're dealing with how to get into certain corners certain ways or how to get out of them cleanly, it's going to come back to weight transfer and how you dealt with it in your setup changes as a crew chief, and also how you deal with it as a driver through your steering input and your throttle and your brake control. I hope that you've enjoyed this show, and more importantly, I hope you've learned something from it. I hope you really understand weight transfer, what's going on while you're out there on the track. This is the Simpit Driving School. I'm Sean Cole, and I'll see you on the track.